Thank you everyone for joining on time, for coming in from different time zones. I'm very happy that we have a global representation here today. And welcome everyone to today's FT3 ACCESS series, patient-centered value in HTA deliberations, learnings from case examples. We'll hear today from various experts that I have the pleasure to introduce in just a second about their experiences with patient involvement and patient-centered evidence within HTA decision-making. We move to the next slide. I will give a short introduction to the topic and where we're coming from and hoping to go. Then we'll have the various keynote presentations from our experts today. We'll open up to a Q&A where you all have the chance to ask the questions that will certainly be burning on your lips after the presentations. And finally, we will go into a short co-creation activity where we'll explore different topics related to patient involvement and patient-centered evidence in value assessment of innovative health technologies. That being said, a quick recap on the ACCESS series, which is a collaborative space for paving the way towards a future where evidence-based precision medicine is accessible to all patients who could benefit. The ACCESS workshop series hosts different experts that share their learnings. For peer-to-peer learning, we work together to enact systemic change here by exploring different tools, resources, and the insights that the community brings together. And we also work together to collaboratively enhance our capacity to enable personalized value-based care. That being said, we're coming from a context in which innovation is overtaking in speed how our structures in society are able to deal with advances specifically in science. And if we move to the next slide, it's just a snapshot from the oncology ecosystem where we see that in the past 20 years, the speed of innovation has significantly accelerated. And on top of that, more than 80% of new interventions are actually targeted therapies, which of course target and try to address the issues within specific subpopulations that harbor biomarkers that can be targeted for fighting cancer in this particular case. This is particularly important in our context today because this personalization, this trend of personalization brings evidence uncertainties into the structures of health technology assessment. It makes it increasingly complicated for the traditional approach of population-based assessment to really understand what value are those new personalized interventions bringing to the patient, to society at large. And so it is a challenge for the long-standing structures of value assessment. And this complication is challenging the assumption that we know what evidence is needed and where to get it from for value assessment. There is a variety of different sources of evidence. Of course, clinical trials are still the gold standard for the evidence used within health technology assessment. However, there is additional models being used to enable a cost evaluation and cost effectiveness evaluation as well. And real world evidence is increasingly a source of certainty. The reality that we're confronting with precision interventions is that they don't deliver necessarily what is considered to be the best evidence in health technology assessment. And this, of course, then have consequences or can have real consequences for patient access. FT3 is working to bridge this gap. On the one hand, we'd like to explore HTA as an adaptive and real-world informed evaluation of innovative health technologies so that patients can have access to the right treatment at the right time when it benefits them. For this, FT3 and its community is working along two dimensions. One that is top-down, exploring what type of guidance can be developed to inform the governing structures that can enable adaptive processes. And on the other hand, what guidance can be given to those that collect data and supply it to HTA bodies and value assessment stakeholders so that those are robust and represent a science-based approach. Now, today, we want to explore this conundrum a little bit more specifically around the dimensions of patient involvement and patient-centered value in health technology assessment. Our experts today will help us understand better current approaches to patient involvement in health technology assessment processes and how patient-centered evidence plays a big role in closing the uncertainty gaps that come with personalized approaches to interventions. And then finally, we'll all work together to identify some practical pathways for including patient-centered evidence and patient perspectives within value assessment and the deliberative processes of HTA. And without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our speakers today. I am joined by Kat Fischer from ICER. She's the Director of Patient Engagement at ICER. We will hear from Eric Liu, the Secretary General and President-elect of Taiwan Young Patients Association, and Alan Bolge, CEO of the Patient Advocate Foundation in the US. We'll hear from them on their experience with patient engagement and involvement in their country's HTA, and of course from Kat from the perspective of the HTA. And we'll also hear from them around how patient-centered value is brought and complemented by patient-centered evidence in HTA deliberations. I can't wait to hear from them. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Kat, who will give us the first presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vincent. I just sent a request to share slides. All right, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As Vincent mentioned, I am the Director of Patient Engagement for ICER, the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review. And today I'll start with a very brief introduction to some of the global trends that we're seeing in patient involvement for HTA. And then most of my time today I'll spend introducing ICER, our value assessment framework, our process for engaging patients, the impact of patient engagement in our reviews, and then talk a little bit about what I see as kind of the next phase of patient involvement. And one quick note here, I think the global term that we're using is patient involvement, but within ICER, we typically use patient engagement. And so I am using those phrases interchangeably. So starting with the global perspective, I think everyone here can appreciate that HTA bodies across the world represent a wide range of roles and structures within different country and health system contexts. There's different remits and processes. And given that, the way in which patients are involved in those processes can really vary. And I think one thing that is consistent, however, is just this growing recognition of the importance of involving patients in HTA. And that is definitely evidenced by just webinars like today, and just getting together and being able to discuss the progress made and the gaps that remain. It's evidenced by how many different HTA processes have really evolved over this last decade to be more inclusive of patients. I think ICER can be a really good example of that. And then evidenced by just the increase in the amount of publications on this topic. And so I think the recent publication of the second edition of Patient Involvement in HTA book that came out, it's always on my desk here, is a really great example of just the recognition and awareness and importance of patient involvement. With that, I think it's hard to talk about the global perspective without acknowledging the HTA regulation that's gone into effect in the EU as of 2025. And for the first time mandating patient involvement across Europe and their HTA work across their joint clinical assessments and scientific consultations. And I think that's just a good nod to this growing recognition. And I know that's still really early. And so we're all curious to see what the impact and the results will be on patient involvement for this regulation. Something else that we've noted is just that it's really the high income countries that have the resources to explore and implement practically patient involvement within different HTA processes. Um, and the low and middle income countries continue to face challenges in being able to kind of explore this practically. And so just acknowledging that disparity, there are many challenges that may exist for other countries with less resources, just the lack of infrastructure in general for HTA, maybe infrastructure for patient advocacy, limited access to local data to support HTA, limited knowledge or expertise in the relevant research methods required to conduct HTA, low literacy rates, et cetera. And so there's a lot of ongoing challenges there. And I do think that there is a big push for international research collaborations as a really important way to kind of share guidance and practical ways that we can kind of bring some of these other countries along in terms of patient involvement. And then some of the recurring themes that we see for future priorities in patient involvement, capacity building is a big one that I think we're going to talk a lot about today in terms of just increasing the knowledge, the understanding, the resources needed to bring patients and patient groups to meaningfully participate in HTA, but in turn for HTA organizations to be effectively incorporating that patient input is also very important. And then finally, this look at the standardization of engagement methods. And so how do we kind of arrive at some sort of common methodology across agencies to be involving patients while also honoring kind of the unique needs and priorities and variations that we see across country and health system contexts. So with that, I want to transition into talking a little bit more about kind of ICER and what our focus is here. We are an independent 501c3 nonprofit organization conducting health technology assessment in the US. Here in the US, we don't have a formal government HTA agency. And so in the absence of that and the absence of formal or expansive drug price regulation, ICER really functions as an independent group that is putting out comparative clinical and cost effectiveness analyses for new treatments that are awaiting FDA approval. And our goal is to publish evidence-based recommendations for fair pricing and fair access within our evidence reports. And importantly, in the nature of us being an independent nonprofit, we cannot approve, price, or determine insurance coverage for drugs. And so we really are focused on these evidence-based recommendations. Now, in terms of, why do we invite patients into our process? So here in the United States, decisions around drug pricing and patient access are often made without patients. And we believe that patients as the end users of these new treatments need to be involved in decisions that directly impact their ability to afford and access treatment. And in future slides, we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the different dimensions of value, but patient input really can inform the many different dimensions of value that go into an HTA and lead to more meaningful HTA recommendations. And finally, we believe that patients can uniquely contribute their lived experience to the HTA process. And so in ICER's process, in addition to patient engagement, we engage clinicians and manufacturers and insurers, and all of those perspectives are really important, but they cannot replace what we learn about the direct lived experience that can only be understood by speaking directly to members of the patient community. So with that, I wanted to touch really quickly, I think before we can get into kind of the process for how ICER involves patients, it's really important to understand, what even are we measuring when we're talking about this comparative added value of new treatments. And our value assessment framework, which we also call the VAF, is really our guiding structure for developing our evidence reports. And it focuses on four key domains of value that I've listed here. So things that would be familiar in terms of the health benefits that a new treatment might offer in terms of improvement in quality of life or length of life or reduction of side effects. Things like total costs in terms of healthcare system costs, societal costs, maybe in terms of lost productivity, cost to the caregiver, or even cost savings. Um, and then importantly, I wanted to share with everyone today around ICER's domain that we call benefits beyond health. And these are intentionally the aspects of value that we have heard are important directly from the patient community, but that are either not measured within the clinical trial program or are really hard to measure. Things like how does a new treatment allow an individual to pursue an education or family life in a way that they couldn't before? What is the impact of this new treatment on caregiver quality of life? Are there important differences in maybe the methods of the treatment delivery or treatment setting that either reduces the complexity or increases the complexity of receiving this treatment? Are there opportunities to reduce health inequities across racial or ethnic groups because of access to this treatment? So all of these things are really hard to measure, but we know that are still really important for our understanding of value of a new treatment. And then finally, as part of the defining feature of HTA, we also really want to know about some of the social and ethical priorities in that dimension of value. And so I know that's a lot of text on one slide, but I am hoping that we can kind of visualize all the different domains of value and all the different ways that patient input can directly inform these dimensions. And in terms of how this really kind of materializes within ICER's process and report is our understanding of health benefits, usually informed by the clinical trial evidence that we have at that point, is conducted through our comparative clinical effectiveness analysis. Our understanding of total cost is understood through the comparative cost effectiveness analysis. But really importantly, this is just kind of half the picture here in that we still have these two additional domains. And that really comes to life during our public meeting deliberation. And so just wanted to emphasize that our approach to the value assessment framework and every ICER review is both evidence-based and quantitative, but there are also these very important qualitative, deliberative aspects of conducting HTA. And I'm really excited to have Alan here to kind of speak about some of those aspects from his perspective. So moving into our patient engagement process here at ICER, I like to think about it in these four distinct phases. And so phase one of our process is an invitation for the patient community to share their lived experience with ICER. Phase two is an invitation to respond with feedback to draft iterations of our work. Phase three is an invitation to participate at our public meeting. And finally, we hope that in engaging in this process, that the very last phase really is we hope that the final ICER report can serve as a tool to further empower your patient community with evidence. And so for each of these phases, I wanted to just provide a little bit more context on how patients can engage with ICER. This is not an exhaustive list, but just to give everyone a sense of the different formats and avenues for input. So for sharing your lived experience, we offer virtual calls. We offer the Share Your Story form. It's an online form that lives on our website. And we also conduct interviews with patients and caregivers. In terms of responding with feedback, we accept many different forms of formal written feedback through our public comment periods. We have other feedback opportunities through calls and also early review of our deliverables prior to publication. At the public meeting, members of the patient community can attend the meeting. They can be invited to serve as one of two patient experts throughout the 6-hour meeting. They can deliver a 5-minute oral comment and participate on our policy roundtable. And finally, we hope that having an evidence-based report will allow these patient groups to continue advocating for fair pricing and fair access. So that's our process. And I also wanted to kind of walk through some of our patient-centered kind of engagement touch points that we have. And so at the beginning of every ICER review, I conduct a 1-hour onboarding call with every patient group that may be interested to better understand, what is HTA, what is ICER's goal, why are we inviting patients into our process, and how can you participate? And this has been just a huge way of kind of, I think, first pausing to kind of educate and share our missions and our goals before kind of jumping into the involvement within the actual HTA review. And so that's been just an awesome experience to include within our process. We have several new patient-facing process and methods guides that I'll show here in a second, as well as a patient-facing summary of every ICER report that we call the ICER snapshot. This is a quick 5-page summary of what could be 100+ pages of a technical ICER report. And now every ICER process concludes with an end of review survey and debrief call that we offer to the key engaged patient advocacy organizations to share their experience in the process and any other concerns that may have come up so that we can kind of discuss and talk about how ICER can still continue improving in the ways that we involve patients. And then finally, a commitment to compensating patients for time-intensive activities during ICER's process. I know I'm running short on time here, and so just quickly going through some of these other slides in terms of the patient-facing process guides that we have to bring patients along and how they can share, respond, and participate. A quick guide on some of the cost-effectiveness tools that we use to kind of break some of these very complex terms into patient-friendly language. And then closing here with some case examples that I've pulled from some of our recent ICER snapshots from recently published reviews. And so just kind of zooming in on some of these case studies, we heard from the patient community for SMA that the clinical trial outcomes didn't quite meet all of the meaningful improvements that they would like to see in function. And so ICER was able to update our clinical section to reflect some of those additional clinical outcomes. For a review of a new gene therapy for retinitis pigmentosa, patient input led us to add additional clinical outcomes to our economic model based on patients really emphasizing their desire to maintain stability for their levels of vision. For our review of multiple sclerosis, just ICER being able to better understand the patient experience and with navigating the healthcare system, frustrations with coordinating care and the lack of specialists in this field, and being able to elevate that within our report. And then finally, of understanding how the long diagnostic journey for patients with IgA nephropathy could help inform our key policy recommendation to help improve access to kidney specialists. And so just kind of showing the arc of different things, different ways in which patient input has impacted our clinical understanding, our approach to the economic model, our understanding of the patient experience, and also some of our final policy themes that come out of our meeting. And then to leave everyone here with just looking ahead at some of these upcoming patient-centered initiatives that I'm really excited about. Plugging the HTAI Patient and Citizen Involvement Interest Group is now working on a new international collaboration to really define and evaluate the impact of patient involvement in HTA. So much more to come on that, but I think kind of from my earlier slide, just a great example of how we can bring different stakeholders together to be thinking about the practical implementation of some of these process adaptations across HTA systems and contexts. ICER's continued commitment to improving patient accessibility in general, but also their understanding and inclusion within ICER's approach to the cost effectiveness analysis part of our work. And so just a huge push for that this year. And then finally getting to share the exciting update that we're in the middle of changing terms for ICER's patient council. And we're going to be shifting our focus a little bit from kind of these broad levels of kind of effort put into creating patient engagement materials about HTA in general and the process in general to kind of doing a deeper dive into specific drug review process adaptations that could lead to more meaningful patient involvement at ICER. So with that, I will close my presentation for today and happy to answer any questions during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kat. This was a great insight and presentation on how patient involvement in HTA and value assessment works at ICER. I heard from you there's a growing recognition of the importance of involving patients globally, and patients are key contributors to value assessment and defining what value actually means. But what I found also very interesting is it's a give and take. ICER is doing a lot to make it possible for patients to participate and bring evidence, but they can also take the experience and assessment back to their organizations to support their efforts directly. Thank you so much for sharing this. Eric, from your advocacy perspective, how has your experience with HTA in Taiwan been?
Okay, so should I start my presentation or?
Sure.
Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Okay. So hi everyone. I'm Eric Liu from Taiwan Young Patient Association, and I am one of the patient representatives in the National Health Insurance Reimbursement Committee right now. So this committee basically get to decide what kind of treatment should be reimbursed by the National Health Insurance. And I am one of the steering committee member of HTA Patient and Citizen Involvement Group, just Kate just introduced earlier. So I had a lot of experiences of involving into the HTA process and National Health Insurance appraisal process. Okay, so before I start my sharing, I would like to ask everyone a question. So imagine you're at a high-end steakhouse, a $200 dollars Wagyu steak is served. What defines its value? So is it the cost of the ingredients? Maybe Japanese farm careful cow care, or maybe the rare Japanese spices, or even the wine? Or is it the chef's skill? Maybe it's a very skillful chef, so you have to hire him for a lot of money. Or is it the diner's experiences? Maybe there are some music playing in the steakhouse. So I think in HTA, we often behave like the restaurant's owner, focusing on the cost and the skills and maybe the ingredients. But we often forget to ask the diners, the patients, what they really need. So in Taiwan HTA process, as we can see, when a pharmaceutical company, they apply for a review of a new treatment, the National Health Insurance Agency, they will invite the HTA body in Taiwan to do the HTA report, and they will discuss with a expert consulting committee, and then the HTA report will be delivered to the Pharmaceutical Benefit and Reimbursement Scheme Joint Committee, the appraisal meeting. At the same time, patients can provide their opinions on a patient opinion sharing platform. But patients' opinions are not discussed in this patient expert consulting committee. So the patient expert's opinion basically is not calculated into the HTA report, but they will provide the opinions to the appraisal committee. And in this appraisal committee, there are two insured representatives who are patients' representatives as well. And there are two other patient representatives. We could be only attend the committee, but we don't have a voting rights. So after the discussion of the joint the appraisal committee, will come out with a decision, and if the committee decide to reimburse the treatment, then our government will negotiate with the pharmaceutical company, and if it's comes out with an agreement, then they will announce the reimbursement of the treatment. So as you can see in the Taiwan HTA process, patients are able to participate into the meetings, but it's not a really formal, and it's not a really we don't really have the power to decide whether the treatment should be reimbursed, and our involvement is too late for the whole process. So I'll be sharing one of the cases that we're doing in Taiwan. We've been advocating for the immuno-oncology therapy for 5 years, since 2020. We started on a policy joint signature platform. So there is a platform in Taiwan. NGOs or even citizens can apply for a proposal, and if it reach 5,000 signatures on the platform in 60 days, then the government, they have to respond officially to the NGO. So at that time, we successfully reached the goal, and then the general director of the National Health Insurance Agency, he brought a meeting with us. So we delivered the expectations from patients on the immuno-oncology therapy. And then in 2022, we feel that their response is not good enough for us. So we held a press conference on World Lung Cancer Day to fight for the innovative treatment for lung cancer patients. Okay, so when it comes to 2023, I think there are 23 cancer patients organizations in Taiwan. We are fighting for a cancer drug fund because we think there is no enough budget for accessing the innovative cancer treatment. So we held a lot of hearings in the Legislative Yuan, which is the Congress of Taiwan. So we presented the needs and the expectation, the unmet needs and the expectations of immuno-oncology therapies to the legislators, so that they can know what are the expectations from the patient side. And at the same time, we started to hold the immuno-oncology forum in Taiwan. We've invited the representatives from the National Health Insurance Administration, and we've invited legislators and physicians and medical societies to discuss how to accelerate the access of immuno-oncology therapy for the cancer patients. And as we held these forum, we also invite the reporters, the journalists to our forum. So they wrote a lot of digital columns and newspapers and even TV news for us. So with the communication with the government and with the medical society and with the public, we have reached some of the goals. So at the beginning, the IO reimbursement, there's a 800 million capping in 2019. And since we started to advocate for invest more in the innovative cancer treatment, you can see the budget started to grow. And in 2022, we successfully removed the capping, so it grew to the 1.5 billion Taiwanese dollars. And then in 2025, because we successfully persuade our government, our new president to invest more in cancer. So he set up a cancer drug fund in 2025. So after that, we have 3.3 billion Taiwanese dollars to reimburse IO treatment in Taiwan, and the reimbursement started to align with the international guidelines. So here's some reflection on what did we do well. I think the first thing is we deepen the expertise. We move from asking for help to proposing solutions. And here are three key domain knowledges. I think it's very important to become a trusted partner. So I think the first thing is the science. We have to understand the clinical data, the efficacy and safety profiles. We have to learn their language. We have to learn what they are talking about. And the second thing is the patient experience data. So it's very important to quantify the patient's daily struggle and quality of life, so that we can discuss with our government or other stakeholders based on numbers. And then the third thing is to know how policies are formed and how budgets are allocated. And I think this is the most important thing. We have to learn the rule on how everything works. So the first thing is to deepen our expertise. And the second thing is when we communicate to the society, we need to use plain language. So we try to use familiar everyday concept to explain complex mechanism. Such as when we're talking about T cells identifying antigens, we will tell the society that, okay, so this is the body's police force. They're checking the ID cards of the bad cells. Or if we're talking about like the next generation sequencing, we'll tell them that it's a mechanism that to check the criminal's ID card. Some kind of this will help us to persuade to make the public learn more about what we care about. And then another thing is to turn clinical endpoints into real life context, and this really helped a lot when we're discussing with the government. So there are two cases. The first one is there's a case of the pulmonary arterial hypertension. Oh, okay, it's a very difficult name, but so there was a treatment that can help the severity from reduce the severity from grade 3 to grade 1. But the government, they don't know what does it mean to the patients. So we've collected some of the information from the patients end. So then patients tell us that if the severity can move from grade 3 to grade 1, then patients will be able to work and raise their families. So this is a very solid point for our government to support, for us to support the government to reimburse this treatment. And another case is for the achondroplasia patients. Okay, so they are very short and they have short limbs. So sometimes they couldn't take care of themselves. They need the help from their families. So there's a treatment that can help them grow up like 3 to 5 centimeters tall. So from the government's end, they will think that, oh, why do we have to pay like millions Taiwanese dollars so to help them grow up 3 to 5 centimeters tall? But the patients tell us that if they could grow 3 centimeters taller, then the patients can wipe themselves after using the toilet. And this could really help them to rebuild their self-esteem, and then their families won't need to take care of themselves 24 hours. So I think these techniques help us really tell the governments what are the value from patient sense. Okay, and the last thing is to mobilize the network. Before we communicate with our stakeholders, we usually do a key stakeholders mapping. So we will find out who have the most power and the most interest. We will manage them closely. And for those who have many, a lot of power but they have low interest, we have to keep them satisfied. And for those who have low power but high interest, we have to keep them informed. And for those who have low power and they don't have much interest, we have to keep them monitored. Uh, so in for example, for those who gets to decide almost everything, we have to manage them closely. So we focus on the solutions, but not problems. So such as the Ministry of Health and Welfare, the National Health Insurance Administration, or the legislators from Health Committee, we show them that our proposal is clinically effective and financially sustainable, and the most important is it's very important. It helps the patients to deal with the unmet medical needs. And for those, we have to keep satisfied, such as the Ministry of Finance or the hospital directors or the legislators from other committees. We have to focus on the return on investment and the social cost, and to make the case that it is not if they don't invest now, then it will cost more in the future. And for those who we want to keep informed, such as the patient advocacy groups or caregivers or the families, we equip them with weapons and a microphone. So we educate them with data and stories, and then we provide a platform for them to turn the scattered voices into a unified force to help us. I think advocacy is not about getting the most support, but is to reduce the objectives to minimize those who might oppose us. Okay, so the last group will be the crowd. So we have to let the crowd know this is an important issue, and we have to find for their support on the social media. Okay, so in conclusion, I think HTA, the whole process is to creating wins for all. I think it is important to build a win-win partnership among different policymakers. And through collaborations, I think we can turn patient needs into solutions that can serve all. Okay, so thank you. This is all my sharing.
Thank you so much, Eric. Fantastic presentation. And really loved how you started the meeting, the talk. We cannot forget, especially when we talk about government institutions who we're really trying to serve in the end, and those that are the ones that should receive the benefits as well, can speak up together and make a difference. And you mentioned that in Taiwan, patients are able to participate in the HTA process, but there is still a lack of formalization and influence that patients can have. So that's why advocacy is so important as well to achieve great success like yours in terms of managing to push through the Cancer Drug Fund, for example. There's also some questions, but before we go there, Alan, you've made experiences with HTA directly, but also beyond. You've been working tirelessly to advance the science of patient involvement. So curious to hear from you now.
Yeah, the great presentations, Eric and Kat. Really appreciate being here to follow up. And I'm just going to react to what's already been said and maybe expand the thinking a little bit as we go out to the breakout rooms. I'll also catch us up on time a little bit here. But thank you. Nice to see everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. I guess just some quick background. We are a US-based a safety net charity, actually. So we support low and middle income patients and caregivers in the United States, hundreds of thousands of people to the tune of several hundred millions of dollars. So Eric, happy to share with you about the role and the benefits of having funds available to support patients' medical care costs. Obviously, we in the U.S. We have a great healthcare system, but also know we're not exactly the envy of the world in a lot of ways, but especially when it comes to access and affordability. But one thing that we do have that's, I think, unique and a source of pride actually is ICER and their approach to patient engagement as well as evidence, and also their willingness to incorporate the patient voice and other aspects of what's important to patients in ways that may not be available to other HTA bodies, in part because they, as Kat said up front, they're not how they do their work is not dictated by anything in the regulatory framework or the legislative framework. So it does give them the space to be innovative and to be creative and to push the envelope. They don't have to, but they do. And I really appreciate that. And I'm not just saying that just by standing on the sidelines. We and so many other groups here in the United States have been invited to and have participated closely with ICER as they've been on their journey of engaging patients and involving patients in the ways that Kat alluded to. And our journey with them started as early, I went back and looked at least 2016, when they were developing their own patient engagement guide. And really thanks to the work of Eleanor Perfetto, who many of you know, really was leading and helping facilitate that work and getting a lot of different patient groups involved. And I think Eric made the point, it's really important to build trust and credibility in this space of what I would also not just think about patient engagement, but patient-centered evidence. And I think those are both two sides of the same coin of patient-centered value. It's the patient engagement piece and the patient-centered evidence piece. And so, that process, and it's easier said than done. The patient engagement part, I think, is still difficult, but the easier part of it, the patient-centered evidence part, is the more challenging part. And that's where I'm going to end here in just a couple of minutes as we go through this quickly. But I think what ended up happening for us is ICER actually invited us as an organization to be on all their voting panels as a patient advocacy organization. So we have a representative that sits on, they have 3 different voting panels that are divided up into regions. And so we've had a front row seat going back to 2020, actually being on voting panels and watching each deliberation, including obviously the clinical effectiveness, all the different elements that Kat walked through, so I won't repeat them. But then there's also a lot of feedback from those voting panels, and there's meetings at the end of the year where we sit down together and really think about the process. And it's not just patient advocacy groups or patient advocates that are on the panel, although there are, beyond just us, there are patients on the panels and also that participate in the review process, as Kat outlined. But that's really provided an opportunity to think more deeply and really interrogate and amend the process of the deliberation. And so I think that's been a nice give and take with ICER and the leadership there and the folks that do the work to think about how can we broaden patient engagement, but also really start to incorporate these things that matter to patients that may or may not be in the data set. And that's the real rub, is what's in the data set at the end of the day. I do think when we're talking about patient-centered value, it's really important I already said patient engagement, patient-centered evidence kind of are the different sides of the same coin. But I also think it speaks a lot to who is involved. So the diversity and representation of the engagement, but also importantly, the evidence that's generated, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, really needs to represent a broad range of different types of patients. And I would argue that the socioeconomic variability is probably the most important thing to get right from the beginning. And here in the obviously people don't think of the U.S. as a low and not even close, right? The opposite of a low and middle income country, but we do have low and middle income patients and caregivers, and that's true everywhere. And so I think that's we want to include those countries in deliberations and also think about how, their HTA process is being set up. But also I think even in countries that have fewer low and middle income patients relative to other countries, that involvement of low and middle income patients and caregivers is really important everywhere and anywhere. So that's step number one. I think then what is involved? And I already alluded to it. It's really important to have that patient engagement, both in the HTA process throughout anything. Obviously for patient groups, it's really, this is all about being patient-centered from beginning to end. But particularly in the evidence and the data generation, you have to have that representation. You have to have the data that speaks to what matters to patients. And that's the last point is which data are we talking about? You've seen it alluded to, Eric alluded to it, Kat alluded to it. It's not just data about the safety and efficacy. And it's not an or conversation. It's an and conversation. So you obviously need the clinical safety and efficacy data as a starting point. You need the quality of life data, but ultimately, and it was said in different ways, we just call it the necessities of life. What are those things about the treatment or the standard of care as a comparator, or that really differentiates, the experience of the patient as it relates to really fundamental things? Uh, you know, Time off work or the ability to be productive at work, transportation burden, caregiver burden, food on the table. The list goes on and on about things that are important to patients. And I think if you move away, when you think about the necessities of life and you think about the different journeys of low socioeconomic patients or low and middle income patients and caregivers, there's a fairly common theme across countries and across diseases of how different technologies may affect, either make better or make worse, in some ways, the lived experience of patients as it relates to the necessities of life. And make no doubt about it, those are a lot of the things that create access and affordability barriers if a therapy is ultimately approved and is available to the population in whatever healthcare setting that they're receiving their care in. So I think what this has led us to, after being heavily involved with ICER and then expanding internationally into working with groups like the Synergists and FT3 and PFND, and also ISPOR now for many years as well, being part of their patient councils, is really the key missing piece is the data piece, I would argue. So, even with ICER, who has really been, I think, at the forefront of trying to expand what is considered as part of the deliberations in terms of value to patients and meeting unmet needs, it does really often come down to more of a qualitative, and I would say even somewhat anecdotal conversation about what's important to patients and what may be missing. And I think Eric had a great example of how to take that, some of the things that might be missing and translate it into something more meaningful from a data perspective or from an awareness perspective. But that's the challenge, I think, is how do we, and it really has to start with the clinical, in my opinion, in the clinical trial data set. Because if it's not in the clinical trial data set, and that goes back to the original statements about, well, who is the data from in the clinical trial and which data are we talking about? And so if that data about the necessities of life and the lived experience of life and the unmet needs of patients, or how the needs of patients might be met better or differently versus comparator or standard of care in a clinical trial, without that data that is often used in the first rounds of HTA analysis, the HTA bodies can only do so much to include, obviously engaging patients in their deliberations and process is one thing, but really using evidence and thinking differently about how they conduct their cost effectiveness review or the methodologies they use to do that. And I know those are constrained as well in some places by regulation or law, but without that innovation and the science of patient-centered evidence coming from the clinical trials and really expanding that data set to include these things that really matter to patients, those unmet needs, those different endpoints that speak to, obviously some things that are quality of life related, but also the important things in life that really drive whether or not you can afford care, like being able to stay at work or continue working. So I think that's the challenge, and that's where we've really started focusing our efforts, is moving, I guess, more upstream in the process and trying to really engage those stakeholders that influence the data set, which in this case, I think is the clinical trial data set, whether it's, whether it's industry sponsored or investigator initiated, but also then, how are those data being treated and used in methodologies so that ultimately you're feeding then into the HTA environment new data and new data sets that can be used differently by groups like ICER and others to really think not just how do we involve patients in the deliberation and really have robust discussions about unmet needs or contextual considerations, as I think we used to call it, now it's benefits beyond health. But how do we really have the data so that we can have additional analyses so we can compete on a quantitative and qualitative plane at a level of rigor that is similar to the quality data and the safety and efficacy data. So happy to discuss more about this in the breakout rooms. I know we're running over time already, and I promised to go quickly. So thank you for the time. Really appreciate the presentations again by Kat and Eric, and look forward to the breakout room discussions.
Thank you so much, Alan. Great talk with strong calls to action there around data collection, where that can happen and where we can move the needle collectively. Really loved how you reinforce the give and take between HTA and patient groups to build trust, but also to shape the processes together. I think that is a very powerful statement, and really appreciate it as well. The mentions of different determinants of health and of what value could mean to the patient community or those that are impacted by disease, be that directly or indirectly, and how that may also indicate that there could be a fair adaptability and learning across borders between patient populations, countries, and contexts. So thank you very much, Alan, for this. I did see a question for Eric in the chat, and I think Eric has already answered it. But maybe, Eric, do you want to say a few words on the patient opinion digital platform? I think this is quite when I first heard about it, I was also very intrigued. So why don't you say a few words around this?
Okay, so when the pharmaceutical companies they apply for the review of the drugs, the HTA body they will announce on this platform, and they will inform us to provide our opinion to this platform. So there is a form, and they ask some questions, including what are the unmet needs of your disease, and how is the quality of life for now, and what are the experience of using the new treatments, if there is if you have used the new treatment, and what are the expectations on the new treatment. So you can provide your opinions to this platform, and then the HTA body will compile them into a report, and this report will be provided to the appraisal meeting. But as the charts I shared earlier, these reports will not be discussed in the expert consulting meetings. So, which means the patient's opinions will not be calculated into the HTA report. This is not one of the discussion. So the formal reports, there will be a HTA report and a patient opinion part, and they combine together to the appraisal meeting. And so then the appraisal committee will decide whether this treatment is beneficial for the patients, and is it financial sustainable for the national health insurance. But most of the discussion is based on the budget impact. Yeah, to be honest. So patients' opinion have little impact to these discussion.
Thank you, Eric, for elaborating on this. Nicole, you have your hand up.
Yeah, a great presentation, Eric. Thank you so much. I just had a question when it comes to the policy platform. So with the urgency to get 5,000 signatures in, was it 60 days? Do you see that the patient advocacy groups are working together? I'm just kind of picturing that, you have individual groups that are doing it and then you don't reach the 5,000 threshold. So do you see groups working together to reach the 5,000 signatures in that short time?
Yes, I think patient groups in Taiwan, because there is a alliance in an alliance for patient groups in Taiwan. We have like around 40 patient groups together in that alliance. So we help each other to reach the goal together. So January or February, I think there is another proposal for the IBD the IBD treatments, and all of the patient groups help them to reach the threshold. I think it's quite unified for patient groups in Taiwan to help each other to reach the threshold. And I think another thing is because oncology therapy, it is a very highly expected treatment for all cancer patients and to the society. So I think the whole society is helping us, including the doctors and the industry. So that's why we are able to reach the goal in that short time. I think we reached the goal in only 40 days. Yeah. So it was a great success at that moment.
That's impressive. Thank you, Eric. David, nice to see you. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the presentations. Very interesting to see the correlation between the steak at the restaurant and the value added. So it's try to get this similar related with what Kat mentioned in her presentation about beyond the health. So I just wanted to ask Kat, how do you see the advancement in terms of demonstrating this beyond health domain for the decision-making process, and what is needed from the community to bring the data to demonstrate those elements of value? Thank you.
Hi, David. Yes, thank you for your question. I think I had kind of within the ICER process, shown all the different ways that we have opportunities to engage with patients. And I really do think it's in direct conversation. So we do a lot of Zoom calls with individual patients via interviews or with patient advocacy groups over Zoom. And I think in those conversations, it doesn't have to be like a robust study or a published, evidence report on anything. It's just in those conversations, we are able to kind of understand those patient insights and then bring them into the report, highlight them in the benefits beyond health section of the report. And then those get elevated as specific voting questions that the independent appraisal committees are asked to vote on in terms of, based on the patient input written up in the report, based on the public comments that we hear during the public deliberation directly from patients and caregivers. How would you vote on some of these aspects that are kind of within the benefits beyond health domain? And then those go into kind of the final kind of summary judgment of value as they're voting on the long-term value of the therapies.
Thank you. Not an easy task, but very good approach. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, David. Thanks, Kat. Victoria, I'll give you the floor for the last question.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the presentations. My name is Victoria. I'm a researcher in Argentina and happy to hear you. So here we are moving forward this kind of involvement, though the main challenge is that payers at the end of the day, usually in their value framework, whether explicit or not, they consider mainly a budget impact and of course the quality of the evidence and stuff, but usually since they don't really perceive that added value, the beyond that Kat was mentioning, for example, the caregiver burden or loss of productivity and those type of stuff, it's really frustrating for patients because when they engage, they show what they care about, but at the end of the day, they don't get coverage because payers they are not the ones that perceive that added value beyond the traditional benefit. So does this resonate with either the speakers, with your context, and how do you manage to cope with this type of challenges so that patients that engage and they bring the time and the value to the table, they don't get frustrated because those things are not considered at the end of the day. Thank you so much.
I mean, we've had a lot of I mean, it's a little different, obviously, in the US because you have a different insurance framework. And you have a private insurance framework in a lot of countries as well, but usually as a secondary or additional on top of the public insurance or as an option. But at least in our, and since this is FT3, I'll speak specifically to targeted treatments and especially those that tend to be expensive. I think what insurers are realizing, if you look at this through a cost effectiveness lens, is that we're talking about really expensive therapies. And you're going to get, if a patient is eligible for them clinically, right, you're gonna be choosing between one of several very expensive therapies. So increasingly what we've heard is we now see the value in not giving the wrong expensive treatment to the wrong patient at the right time. So I think that's the common denominator is really pushing on this idea is we all have this invested interest of getting the right treatment. And treatment's not necessarily the right care, right? Because good care could mean not treatment yet, right? So good care, the right care to the right patient at the right time. And there is a cost effectiveness argument that can be associated with that edict. And if you can tap into that and show, look, there is a significant consequence financially, and then if for just, and again, for patients, that's not the way it's looked at. But if you're talking about those that think in terms of those numbers and budget impact, there is a significant consequence to giving the wrong treatment at the wrong time, especially if you're talking about a very expensive targeted treatment. And that has implications for for outlaying those dollars that are not going to work, especially when there's an alternative that would have been a more appropriate targeted therapy for that patient that would have worked better. So you're laying out money that is not going to work for the patient, and then oftentimes that same patient, once that therapy fails them, knowing that there was an alternative that would have been more cost effective from the beginning, it's even more expensive, right? As you move down the line, because now the options are fewer. Whatever treatment is now available is going to be second or third line therapy, less efficacious, and the cost and complications of care and disease increase. So the problem is capturing that in a data set again, which goes back to, are these things being considered and data relevant to them being considered in the clinical trial environment? So you can demonstrate not in the real, and great, having it post-market, real world evidence is nice, but really what you need is pragmatic trials, at least phase 3, collecting this data set that really speaks to how these things make a difference in the lived experience in the life of patients that do have a budget impact. And that's hard to do because you're trying to translate things that may not have a dollar value into a cost effectiveness analysis, and there's a long conversation, a long history of, how do you take things that may not have a dollar value and, because not everything that's important has a dollar value, as we all know. But of course, in cost effectiveness analysis, that's the challenge, right? Is you have hard costs, and some hard benefit costs, hard costs, the negatives and the positive, what goes on the ledger, if it's in monetary terms, it just has more equal footing. That's in my opinion, based on lots of experience with this, not just here, but also in the environmental field, where cost-effective analysis and cost-benefit analysis also looms large in terms of making decisions.
Thank you for the question, Victoria, and thank you, Alan, for answering it. We had prepared 3 breakout groups to discuss different topics in smaller groups. Now, this was assuming that we had more than 60 registrations to this session today, and also some more time, which we don't have anymore. So what I will suggest is that we all come together and we discuss all 3 topics at a higher level in this plenary. I've shared a link to a group map that we can use to take notes and to act on together, and exactly, one big cozy group. And I'll also share my screen so that we can look at it at the same time. For the group map, once you have clicked on the link, it will prompt you to add your email address, and then you have direct access and can integrate your thoughts. We had thought about 3 topics to discuss today. One being very close to Victoria's last question, actually, around how can we link different value elements that are maybe traditionally not integrated within HTA and narrate them with HTA-ready and credible patient-centered evidence. We also have heard from our speakers that there are different mechanisms that actually work in ensuring that patient perspectives are meaningful and influential in the HTA processes. And finally, we've also heard that there's alternative pathways that can be taken to make a difference in the access landscape and in how HTA is being leveraged to support patient access to innovative technologies. And so also there a third topic around what patient advocacy groups can do to expand patient involvement and patient-centered evidence within the HTA process. So happy to hear any thought that comes up for any of the 3 topics and start a conversation on that. And I really invite everyone to share what's on their mind.
Should we put like the tab? Sorry, it's the first time I use this platform. Should we put on the tab and then write there, right?
Yes, you can tap and you can click, but feel free to speak up, and I'll make sure to also take notes.
Oh, okay. So I think one of the challenges for the first one is that much more evidence is needed. I think that was something that was already mentioned. Because one of the risks when you involve patient, like 1 or 2 or 3 patients, is that you might get also biased information because they sometimes talk about, of course, the personal experience, but that might not necessarily represent a broader group of patients. So then you also might need to complement with evidence that it's hard to get because, of course, you need investment and how can these elements, with evidence, of course, but it's hard to get that evidence, right?
Absolutely. Thank you, Victoria. And Natalie, you want to react directly?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure where this goes, and that's why I want to talk about it verbally. But one thing that we find a lot of times is we just can't get the numbers, especially for new treatments. So I'm just wondering if that's something that different groups in different countries could all work together on. A lot of times treatments come out in other countries before they come out in Canada. So, other countries have more access to people who've actually had experience with a new therapy. And so when we do it, we get like 3 people. And so it's not enough evidence. And so sometimes evidence is not just about having the data, but having enough of the data. So I'm just wondering if there's something we can do to help each other getting that.
Thank you, Natalie. That's certainly a challenge, finding the right people to participate in the studies and getting the data from somewhere. Wondering if there's someone who has who has made a good experience or has found a way to actually reach the people to build a comprehensive data set. Eric, go ahead.
Well, to be honest, I don't have a great solution for this because we are facing the same challenge in Taiwan. Yes, before the National Health Insurance reimbursed the treatments, we couldn't really collect the experience of using the new treatment because patients often couldn't pay out of pocket for those innovative treatments. So I think it would be great if we can share experiences and data across countries. I think that might help a lot.
Thanks, Eric. David, please go ahead.
I think that we have been discussing several forums. One of those big challenges is what are the expectations regarding the data and what the quality of data. Sometimes we have the heritage of the clinical trials data. And when we go beyond health and all the domains that Kat mentioned, we tend to see or respect the high quality demanding data that is not existing somehow. So probably one of the recommendation might be how we can balance or recalibrate the expectations of the regulators or decision makers about the type of data that is needed. If we want to explore new domains of value, you cannot follow the same methodologies. You need to have a new mechanisms, and it has been discussed as eSport or HTA and access forums, but there's not too much happening in that context. So those who are really managing the methodologies, are they open to be more flexible or to explore even the gathering of AI data that exists somehow, somewhere, and will be more available in the next years, if you want, or even right now, from the real experiences of people leading their lives, moving forward because of the treatment, going to the education, getting married, getting, children, all of those things that are not captured today because there's no mechanism, but there's no appetite either. So this is my reflection.
Thank you so much, David. I love where you're going with that. And Rick, I was thinking about you. I am glad you raised your hand. So please go ahead. I know you work on this topic.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks, Vincent, and thanks, David, for those thoughts. I was thinking the same thing along the same lines as David, is I think, and especially when we think about targeted treatments and rare or ultra-rare diseases, you're never going to have the same quality of data that you have for more common diseases, and especially for some of these patient-centered elements. And so I think we really need to do more work around mixed methods and how, to Alan's point earlier about cost and quantitative data can really gets the attention. We need to find ways to bring in mixed methods and other ways to integrate quantitative and qualitative data so that the qualitative data can have the appropriate weight in these types of assessments.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you, Rick, for that addition. There are other thoughts around how to upgrade the data collection, or maybe around what type of capacities as well could be built and fostered collaboratively to enable the patient community to take part in this data collection process. It's a difficult one. I'd also be curious to hear if there are any examples from, well, really from any background, maybe an experience with mixed methods or an experience of leveraging real-world data sets and packaging them. Victoria, please go ahead.
So I worked in a patient's preferences study across LATAM countries, across 7 LATAM countries, where we tried to elicit patients' preferences in SMA. And we had very interesting findings, and Kat, I believe, mentioned something about SMA, and also that there is a challenge between the study outcomes that usually capture and what they actually feel that it's affecting their lives and their families. And it was a great experience. We involved with patients, organizations across all the many LATAM countries, and it was a great experience. But again, when we presented that that evidence that was very strong in the methodological aspect, and we use another methodology, just as one of the participants was mentioning. When we presented that to our HTA body, for example, patients' preferences is not under the value framework to evaluate technologies. So then there were like a lot of effort, and our patients' organizations here in Argentina said, yeah, but we participated and everything, and then it wasn't like really influencing the decision-making process about coverage in SMA. So on the one hand, it was a great experience to involve and capture different aspects of the value of technologies in SMA. But then it was hard to deal with that frustration that came after the great experience of generating valuable data for decision makers. In other countries, though, they were much more open to hearing the results of the study, but not in all of them. So there is still some path there to go through.
Thanks, Victoria. And that sounds certainly frustrating. If you're having a great study with great data and then it's not being used. David, you also have your hand up.
Yeah, just going back
directly on this.
Yeah, it's going back to the same challenge of the source of data are existing all the time, and people are gathering information from patients all the time. Even in the US, you go to the visit of the doctor and you get a call the next day asking you plenty of things, sending service all the time. But I think that there's no kind of a discipline to think about what are the questions that you want or you need to ask. It's not about just the service, it's about those additional elements that are not captured. If there is an intention, a more rigorous intention, because the qualitative data is relevant or is becoming relevant, it's not that difficult to do. So we at the Max Foundation, we have this massive donation, 40,000 patients worldwide in 80 countries, that in many of those countries, we follow the patients through a tracking system that we developed, and we call them regular basis, like 3-4 times a year. Now we are very deliberate about what type of questions we want to gather from these patients that in the chronic, diseases like chronic myeloid leukemia or even breast cancer, and try to document that experience and start getting at some point in time, creating the baseline. And then when they get access to treatment, what happens? What happened in year 1, year 2, year 3, but you need to design it. Otherwise, it is not coming organically somehow. So that is a way to go. I think the data is there, just how to find it.
Thanks so much, David, for that addition as well. And what I'm hearing a little bit coming through here from the different interventions is, in fact, there are two routes to take. One is who will create the incentives for adapting the structures to leverage patient-centered data and evidence, broaden the understanding of value that the assessor actually tries to assess, and then also how can we get the data in a meaningful way, in a structured way, and who will do that so that the data can be robust enough for consideration too. Thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions today, specifically, of course, to the speakers. Thank you, Kat, Eric, and Alan, for making the time today and being part of this conversation. I want to quickly show one last slide. Now I'll bring that up, just to highlight that this is a part of a series of conversations, dialogues, and engagements that we're having and leading under the FT3 umbrella. We'll be present at ISPOR next week. So if anyone is there and would like to catch up, I'd be happy to connect. FT3 is also hosting a workshop at HTA specifically on this topic. Will be on the 7th of June. That's the Sunday. It's a half-a-day workshop. So happy to I would be happy to see many of you there as well. And of course, we'll also be at the Patient Engagement Open Forum the week before, actually on the 3rd of June, again on this topic. And also there we will hear from Kat wearing more her HTA hat around patient involvement and the impact it brings in HTAs. And towards the second half of this year, we'll be at the Access Forum in Lisbon as well, continuing this conversation and focusing on eliciting some insights from the industry community more specifically. I think there also it will be interesting to report back to you all what the industry stakeholders think about how to design clinical trials and move the needle in data collection and submission packages from that end. I'd be very, very happy to continue the conversation and this work together with all of you. FT3 has a project specifically dedicated to the value of precision medicine, where we're looking at this difficulty in marrying patient involvement and patient-centered evidence and other value dimensions. FT3, also in collaboration with PFMD, is also looking specifically at patient experience data in HTA and what patient organizations and industry can do to collect robust data, in what way, and how to package that for submissions. And following up from this workshop, I'll also make sure to send you the various resources that you can then explore with case examples of how different HTA bodies and different patient organizations and industry partners have made use of patient experience data and preferences for their efforts around patient access to innovative technologies. That being said, thanks again, Kat. Thanks, Eric and Alan. It was a pleasure having you and hosting you here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope it was insightful for you as much as it was for me. I look forward to staying in touch and seeing you all again soon.